Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm one of the co-owners and managing directors with Impetus Digital. For those of you who do not know what Impetus Digital does, is we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous collaboration tools for pharmaceutical, medical device, and other life science and healthcare companies. So we actually help people collaborate and work with physicians, payers, patients, etc., through advisory boards, co-author working groups, medical education programs, and of recent, because of COVID-19, a lot of internal meetings, POA brand rollouts, sales rep training, etc. At Impetus, we believe that everything starts with a thought, a big conversation, something that's provocative, something that's new and bleeding edge. And we like to be able to speak to people like the Mike Waldrons of the world who are doing something that's different and that's big, hairy, and audacious. And so we feel that by having these fireside chats with these innovative provocateurs is that we can start to move the needle slowly but surely in the direction of positively disrupting healthcare. So this is one of the reasons we have this. And so we're very happy to have Mike Waldron at the table with us, the virtual table with us today. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
I want
It's
to
great to be
introduce
here.
Mike. We're very excited to have you here. He's an aeronautical and nuclear engineer. So if that's not enough, he's got years of design, maintenance, operations, and leadership experience. So he's kind of the full package. He also has experience managing a fleet-wide virtual maintenance training implementation project that he did with XR. So he's also a self-proclaimed VR geek. That's a really cool thing to have, and an aircraft and spacecraft enthusiast. So he's also a recipient of multiple engineering, leadership, and teamwork awards, and he's the author of several white papers. So we're going to kind of dig into some of that today. He is currently the CEO and co-founder of Propel VR, and he provides their company provides a variety of virtual reality, augmented reality, and 360 real world experiences. So this is all new stuff, and we're really excited to be able to speak to Mike about what's new in this area and how we all can learn from this in the life sciences space. So Mike, tell us a little bit about your voyage into the place you have now. I mean, you started off with it as an aeronautical and a nuclear engineer. How does a nuclear engineer end up doing VR? So tell us how you got here.
It's a great question, and thanks for the awesome intro, Natalie. I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for having me on. I'm so glad to have connected with Impetus. And I think, yeah, so a little bit about why we started, the journey to get to here. Why is a nuclear and aerospace self-proclaimed geek like myself doing this? I think you said it well about disrupting spaces. So it's all started with in the nuclear industry. My first role out of school was to be a supervisor in a nuclear reactor. And you know, the nuclear industry itself really loves their 1980s technology. They're kind of they've been running with it for decades, and they don't like to change. And I was really shocked at the amount of physical simulation. I'm talking about full mock-ups of reactor control rooms that's still done at very great expense. And this was a few years back, 2013, 2014 timeframe. And even back then, virtual reality and XR technology was at a place where I was going through these trainings. And as someone who's interested in these technologies and has been following them for a while, I knew even back then there was so much you could do at a high level of fidelity with similar results, even with the technology then, and at a greatly reduced cost. So I was kind of thinking about, why aren't people doing these things? What are the barriers to the technology? And that idea kind of festered for a few years, actually. And one of my good friends and co-founders, his name is Richard Beer, kind of inspired me. He was an electrical engineer, regular day job engineer like myself, and decided to take a leap of faith and take the plunge into becoming a full-time virtual reality software developer. And actually became so good at it that he started teaching others how to do it with a company in Calgary, Canada. And so I took some training through them and really boosted my software skills. And now I'm proud to say I'm a virtual reality developer too. So that was a couple of years ago. That gave me the skills I really needed to start making stuff. And I think it was the pandemic that kind of spurred us to action a little bit. We also are affiliated with a group here in Ottawa called Invest Ottawa, who we went through their pre-accelerator program just a few months ago, and happened to win the pitch event at the finale of that, and got some great momentum from that. And I think so there was two things there. One is the Invest Ottawa pre-accelerator was what really got us serious about the business, and got us to actually, stop talking about an idea and go out and get incorporated. But also the pandemic, I think, has really kind of spurred us to action in that, there's opportunities here. And we've seen big changes in the way technology is embraced by the average person, and in the way that people look at safety. And those are two really big things that I think caused us to pivot. Actually our backgrounds, the four co-founders are, none of us are healthcare professionals. So it was actually through Invest Ottawa and these customer discovery sessions that we realized that healthcare is a great space. We felt the gravity, you could say. There's a gravitas to openness to this kind of technology. And so a few months ago, earlier this year, we kind of pivoted and made a decision to talk to lots of healthcare providers, get some advisors. We have some great advisors on our team now who are supporting us with their healthcare expertise. And that's kind of why we're here and why we're talking to you.
I love it. And I think there's a lot of really great inspirational notes there, Mike. There are also a lot of other people in the neurotech, new startup, entrepreneur ecosystem that are also going to be listening to this. And I think this is inspiring because you can have a current position, or you can have this great engineering background, or do something, and you can completely even pivot your own career or aspirations and direction and start something completely new, and something that, and I think COVID-19 has been a really great accelerant for not only personal change, but the change that's, and leveraging the groundswell around industries like you have suggested happening in healthcare. So maybe we can just take a couple of minutes here of maybe taking a look at what you had pre-COVID and then the pivot post-COVID into healthcare. What were you doing prior, and what got you to win the pitch with Invest Ottawa?
For sure. So prior to the pandemic and to our Invest Ottawa involvement, I've been focusing on areas of familiarity. So I've been doing industrial type trainings. Had a demo for lockout tagout training, which is a very common practice that industrial tradesmen use to make either electrical or mechanical equipment safe before they work on it. And it was in a nuclear setting, this technical demo that I had built. So that was kind of where we were at the start of 2020. And then the pandemic hit and we got involved with Invest Ottawa. And actually in the nuclear industry, we use PPE a ton. And so there was a common ground for me that made kind of a focal point for the pivot, I'll call it. And that was the idea of personal protective equipment and prevention and safety. And that allowed me, just with my own PPE experience from the nuclear industry, to take that nuclear demo and actually use a lot of the same digital assets, a lot of the same code, to pivot that product to, instead of putting on a Tyvek and C4 respirator that you would use in a highly contaminated radioactive area, you're just putting on different PPE in a healthcare facility. So that was kind of our early, when we were involved with Invest Ottawa, a lot of focus on the PPE and the prevention. Obviously that had something to do with the timeline of the pandemic too. And we submitted a proposal to the federal government, to Innovative Solutions Canada, for a PPE trainer type product. And that demo is fairly polished at this point. We've run some people through it. We've got a video, I think will be sent out at the end. It's a great sort of 4-minute sample of what that looks like, and also includes how to keep the equipment itself hygienic, because of course you don't want to add an extra vector. A lot of people clue into very quickly that you're bringing extra piece of equipment into a workplace, and you don't want that to become a vector. So that's included in that training too. And from there, I think that gave us a pretty compelling case at the pitch event to say, look, we had a good idea, a good technology. We had a solution, and we had an idea about the problem it was solving, but we actually were hearing from people that there was a different problem it could solve, and that this was a more urgent problem and probably a more meaningful one to try and help the world with right now. So that, was kind of what inspired the pitch and the pivot. And we actually, I'm happy to say, we have our first official customer, who's a small healthcare company in Kingston, who's now funding us to develop advanced cardiology life support demonstration, so ACLS trainer demonstration. And so there's kind of a natural evolution here of our healthcare explorations.
Perfect. That's amazing. So want to kind of linger in this because obviously Impetus is very focused on targeting life science companies, healthcare companies, et cetera. Is, PPE is obviously a core tenet of today's world post and pre, as we're trying to emerge out of the pandemic and sort of maintain and contain everything that's going on. So training and safety is a huge component. So can you actually just tell me, is it really around safety that you're still focusing on in the healthcare space, or are you kind of launching further into bigger realms around training in general? Can you speak to what your current plans are and what the aspirations of Propel VR are in healthcare?
For sure. So safety is our focus for now, I'll say. We definitely are interested in other types of trainings, and you really have to, I think when you're trying to do what Propel VR is trying to do, you have to look at the strengths of the technology. Where's VR better than other mediums? Where does it really shine and add a lot of value? And another area besides, so with the safety topic, I think there's a lot of immersion. You can induce a lot of stressing factors like outside noise, movement, distractions in the virtual environment, which you can't get in a video, that really make it more realistic and give some people some muscle memory to help trigger the proper response in the real situation. So that's why it's strong for safety. But there's a whole other sphere, I would say, that's come up quite quickly, and so soft skills is kind of how I frame these types of trainers. And it's really more about interacting with humans and getting a very human connection with someone who may be someone at the other end of a virtual reality headset as well, maybe someone at the end of a laptop, may actually be a non-player character who you're interacting with, but can be quite expressive. There's a technical demo that's out there called Firing Barry, and it's made for training managers how to approach difficult conversations with employees, and a very effective tool for conveying how hard those things can be without actually having to put someone in that situation. So that's another area that we're interested in. I think the safety was just our focus because of the common ground between the nuclear and the healthcare, and it allowed that pivot. So that's where we are today. Yeah.
So why don't we actually just tease this together, or linger a little bit more on what VR or virtual reality is for those people who sometimes get confused with some of the terminology that goes on today. So there's virtual reality, and there's augmented reality, and then there's XR, which is kind of a mixture of the two. Can you maybe, for the listeners here or the watchers here, kind of explain what it is that you're doing specifically in what is virtual reality doing?
For sure. Yeah. So virtual reality, a lot of people do see virtual reality as kind of a buzzword or this techie word, and perhaps think it's a bit gimmicky. I actually thought that myself until I tried my first headset. And then I was like, wow, this technology is a lot more mature than I thought. But so virtual reality means there's a rendered environment, which you're fully immersed in 360 degrees. And virtual reality comes in two main flavors. One is 3 degrees of freedom system, which is something like the relatively simple mobile headsets you see. Some of these things are as simple as Google Cardboard, where you slide a cell phone into a piece of cardboard. And this is kind of the lowest form of VR. It's not as immersive. A lot of people think of that first, and I try and intend that people don't suggest that, I try and suggest that people don't try that as their first virtual reality experience, because it's somewhat limited in the immersion. The real power of virtual reality is in the 6 degree of freedom systems that allow you to get up, walk around the room, interact with objects. And that is really, really the powerful tool. So we're seeing less and less 3 degree of freedom headsets on the market, more and more sixed off. And they're fully untethered now, which is great. You don't need to be hooked up to a computer. You don't need wires. You don't need sensors. There are options for that now. So that's virtual reality. Augmented reality uses very similar technologies and techniques, but it's quite different in its application. So it takes real world imagery whether you're holding up your cell phone and viewing an image on the screen through the camera, or a lot of augmented reality headsets have cameras that you wear on your face, like glasses that are looking forwards. And the imagery that you see is the real world with something augmented on top of it. So that can be information overlays like menus, buttons, descriptive labels, is a common one, or interactable objects. You can resize things. It's taking the real world and letting your imagination run wild. You can add anything to that you want. And then mixed reality, as you mentioned, is anything that blends the two. So you can use both, and a lot of the hardware supports both, which is fantastic. So a system like the one that I own at home is an HTC Vive, and it can support both. It's got a camera on the front as well. So you have a VR headset and an AR headset all in one. And if it's both, that's when people use the term XR.
So I just want to discover a little bit about why some of the potentially slower uptake of something that's so exciting. I mean, technology that's truly novel and certainly has tons of promise. But what we've noticed is the uptake has not been as quick as it could have, especially, in training environments and learning environments and all kinds of other things and ways it could be used. And I think one of the things that we need to reflect on is being tethered, if you will, to material. And the one thing that's the obvious is the headsets. Not only are the headsets awkward, they're certainly not something that you could walk around with. They're expensive. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on potentially one of the blocks for people not necessarily feeling as comfortable moving into this arena.
For sure. It's a great point. And I think there's a number of things that have slowed adoption so far. The first one is definitely hardware, as you mentioned. I think the HTC Vive a lot of people in the industry look to that as the Generation 1 iPhone. It was kind of a groundbreaker back in 2018 when it came out. But it was tethered by default. You could buy a wireless module, but it was tethered by default. Last year we had a headset come out, Oculus Quest, which is really a game changer. Lowers the price point to like a $500, $600 range per headset. You don't need a computer, you don't need a tether. So the hardware is there now. I think up until, I would say 2019, developers and companies like Propel VR had a pretty good excuse that the hardware was not exactly where it needed to be, and it was still quite a high barrier for a lot of users. That excuse, I think, doesn't really exist in 2020. We have some fantastic headsets, and they're still evolving fast, but the barriers that you speak of, they're largely falling by the wayside. You still see them with a lot of the headsets that are 1 or 2 years old, but anything really new, that is quickly changing. And the Oculus Quest is still a reasonably sized headset. We are starting to see smaller and smaller things. Apple glasses hopefully will get a release date in the next year or so. So those are really exciting technologies on the augmented reality front as well. So that's the hardware. I think cost, we were looking at a couple of years ago, $1,000 to $1,200 per headset. Now you can get quite good ones for $500 to $800. So that barrier is also lowering. I really think with the hardware and the software side, the development tools that are out there today, we're really at this turning point where I think the ball is in the court of developers. And there's a lot you can do with the tools that have come out in the last year and a half. And I think a lot of it hasn't been tried yet. So I think there's just a lot of exploration going on. It's such a new medium. I was having a conversation the other day, things like the scroll bar that you use in every browser window on every computer. That has quite a design history. It started with an engineer at Xerox, and it didn't even have a visualization. And it took about 10 iterations and 10 different people to get it to what it is today, where it scales with the size of the page and all this. And these types of simple things, which seem simple to users, actually have a complex design history. And really, it's a user interface, user experience question. What's the best kind of interaction for people? And because VR is such a different medium, I mean, really, truly, it's like the real world. So I think developers and designers are really just starting to crack these nuts open in terms of what are the best forms of interactions? And it's fun to be a part of the brave new world that gets to try and define these things. It's part of why I made the leap that I did, and why we're doing this, is really get to be a part of something. So I think the ball is in the court of companies like Propel to start to really innovate, especially with things like hand tracking, gaze tracking, blink tracking. These are all new things that we can do them today, but the best applications for them have not been developed yet. So that's very exciting.
And I think this is really, what is just really intriguing. I'm a bit of a tech geek myself, always following what's going on in the leading and bleeding edge spaces. And so it's really intriguing. You mentioned Apple Glass. Again, I think is the next rendition of what Google originally tried to do. There was tons of backlash because it was a little ahead of its time and people were concerned about privacy. But with the Apple Glass, it's kind of like glasses. I mean, we're a little bit more comfortable with this size and this look, and it's potentially something you can walk around with. But one of the other things that's really interesting around hardware is, either 3D printed or really the graphical connection. You were mentioning eye blinking and hand and gesture recognition is getting to a place where you could track the movement of hands, so you're not having to use hand controls anymore. Because I think ultimately, and I was wondering if you could speak to this, is that when we're working in a censored world where information can get tracked and experiences can manifest without necessarily feeling like you're doing anything, where it's just naturally happening, or you're, like you said, immersed. Can you speak a little bit about some of this leading edge work that's going on, where there is this hand gesture recognition, this full body motion capture, and how we're sort of leveraging sort of the blink detection and tracking and into one easy tool?
Yeah, for sure. I think first and foremost, it really, being able to not need controllers and actually track your hands, it really just opens up a whole new type of user who might hesitate to pick up a VR headset otherwise, because they have to learn which buttons to push, that worried about charging the controllers, breaking them, banging them off of walls. I've got, you probably can't see from this distance, there's more than one scuff on my wall from virtual reality controllers. So some people are hesitant about that. And I think it really just, it's one less thing to break, it's one less thing to buy, it's one less thing to maintain, and it's one less thing to learn how to use. So people, from a user experience perspective, it's really a game changer. Kudos to Oculus, because they have a great SDK out that makes it fairly easy for developers to start doing hand tracking. But that's just the starting point for these types of interactions. That's why it's so exciting. So we can track hands in VR today, but what we're really just starting to do is the really cool interactions, like picking stuff up is relatively easy. But I'm really interested in other cool types of interactions that benefit customers. Like one that I think is cool is if you want to change the color of something, you could bring up a radial menu with your hand and drag a spectrum back and forth, left and right, perhaps changes along one part of the color spectrum, maybe up and down changes the size, or a different part of the spectrum. So you can really get creative. You can do things with your fingers. You can have people interact with menus with their eyes, where they don't have to click anything. They just look at the menu option they want and they say start. So that is very exciting to me. I think those users who don't mind controllers are already using VR. So it really key to adoption is these types of things. And I think we're in a really special place today, I think, because even 6-9 months ago, there was no SDK from Oculus for hand tracking. So I see a lot of other virtual reality companies who are either not doing these things or just aware of them. So that's part of the Propel value proposition, is these are the things that excite us. That's why we got into it. So nobody has to pay us to stay on the leading edge of these things, because it's just fun.
It's very interesting. And so I think what you mentioned is really interesting about the barrier to entry or the barrier to adoption. And one of the things that you can see, despite how you look at the COVID pandemic, either the silver lining of it or how horrible it was, and there's obviously both lines of reality to that. But I think that one of the key components here is that it certainly has been an accelerant for change. I think it's also lowered the barrier to adoptions. It's kind of forced people a little bit to the wall to start making things happen so that these sorts of technologies can be adopted, because you have to. So one of the things that becomes really, very obvious in this equation is learning. So if you're thinking about hand washing techniques or how to use PPE, this is sort of the most obvious, immediate utilization of VR as an example. But as we think about the COVID-19, and we're thinking about the extension of this even in learning journeys at schools, universities, basically how people are learning in general, what do you sort of foresee in virtual reality learning environments? How are people going to learn in the future? And I'm just going to take this down specifically to doctors, nurses, allied healthcare providers. Traditionally, having gone to school and university and graduate programs, learning from a textbook, or in the surgical suite, being under the actual, knife and watching while you're actually physically there. What is that new learning environment going to look like for medical professionals moving forward with VR?
For sure. So I think first and foremost, the biggest thing that VR will allow to change for the better in that environment is, I think, the way that people are evaluated. A lot of it today is based on SCORM or something like SCORM, where it's very knowledge-based, multiple choice type questions. I show you a video, and then I ask you a question to gauge whether you absorb the information correctly. And that's effective, but there is a better way, and that's what did you do? So I present you with a situation and observe the actions you take in a realistic setting, and evaluate based on that. So that's what VR enables. XAPI is a term that gets used to describe that paradigm shift. So that's a change to the approach, I would say. And you can also do SCORM knowledge-based. Of course, you can do multiple choice questions in VR. We have them as well. But it really enables some differences in the way we evaluate or teach these skills and observe students. So that's one. I think you mentioned hand washing is another great example where I could ask a question about how to hand wash, or I could ask you to wash your hands and observe you. And that's, you can do that with VR, make sure that, they're washing the backs of their hands. You can have a script that evaluates that you get the fingertips as well, right? So that's pretty powerful. In terms of other applications, there's a few that, really, there's so many to talk about it. It's hard to choose, but some that have been brought to us through the course of the pandemic are spatial awareness is another really powerful thing in VR. You can get a good sense for 3D space. Obviously, you're in 3D space as opposed to looking at a 2D projection of 3D. So if you're looking at something that's, like a blind spot in a car is a lot easier to visualize when you can move your head around and look at it from different angles. So something like visualizing contaminant spread has been mentioned as a very powerful prevention tool. So even at something as simple as someone sneezes and you can see the droplets, particulates in the air, so contact tracing, another one. You could actually visualize contact tracing. Some really powerful value adds on the spatial awareness side. I think you can also do a lot with remote situations, augmented reality or virtual reality. You can put someone in a remote situation before they actually go there. A cool example I've seen is a company that 3D scans oil rigs with drones, and it can put workers in virtual reality on the same rig they're going to work on for 6 months prior to them going out there. So there's a lot of applications that are remote or dangerous that you can do in VR from the safety and comfort of a lab or a classroom setting. I think there's also a lot to be said for the mental health, quality of life type products. A lot of people are stuck at home and feeling isolated, perhaps feeling down. And there's a lot of great social platforms in virtual reality as well. Or you can hang out with strangers or hang out with your friends. And or you can revisit places you've been. There's a really cool application I've seen called a memory finder where you can buy these glasses from Snapchat, and they're pretty cool. They have 3D stereoscopic cameras on the glasses, and they actually don't look too bad. They look hopefully what Apple glasses look something like. And so you can record an operational procedure, and you could replay it in a library to other users. So you could have a surgeon go through a procedure with full 3D video wearing these glasses, and then develop a content library and have folks review it. Is that different from video? It's more immersive, it's more memorable, it's 3D, you get some spatial awareness. So the recorded type applications where you're actually just recording and playing back 360 or 3D video, they're a little less exciting because they're a little less immersive, but they're also cheaper and easier to make. So there's trade-offs there. There's really just so many applications.
There are just so many great ones, and I think the training part of it at the healthcare provider. I think you were mentioning not only how to do procedures, and certainly there's procedures at every level, and a lot of times we're just as humans. You start to go into your day-to-day. You can go into your automaticity mode, and then you can forget things. So what's really interesting is leveraging these to really create good habit formation, and to really create those positive motions, moves, whatever it is that you're doing. And so this is a great amplifier, if you will, on day-to-day tasks that people have to do. So what I think is also potentially interesting is how this plays out for patients. So as we think about them immersing themselves in a potential experience. So right now, a lot of their experience with people through telemedicine is very analog, kind of what we're doing right now. But what could perhaps happen if that experience was a lot more immersive? That it almost felt like you were sitting in the same room with your physician, and so it feels different, it feels more experiential. Or other sorts of things that might be going on that today is still very 2D and very analog, where the patient can actually maybe even preclude themselves into a clinical trial and see what that would look like. And so there's almost like a predictive element to it by kind of pre-experiencing something before you go, and then it allows one to make choices. So can you speak a little bit about where you see this playing out as it relates to patients and participants in clinical studies?
For sure, yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunities for patients, as you said. I think the sort of preview that you mentioned is a great one. I've read a study recently, actually, for pediatrics that was experimenting with VR as a preoperative thing. So you can put perhaps a child who might be nervous through kind of, this is what it might look like, when you show up to the operating room, and this is what's going to happen. And you can walk them through that in VR and get some of the apprehension out of their system, so that when that day comes, it's just a little bit less painful or stressful for them. So I do think there's a lot of cool stuff like that. You can also, on the prevention side, PPE, lots of nurses we spoke to mentioned, this would be great for all of our visitors, because right now they have to take a nurse out of their busy schedule, has to take some time to spend 5 to 10 minutes with every visitor coming into a long-term care facility right now, for example, to make sure that they know what they need to do to keep themselves safe and to keep obviously the vulnerable populations there safe as well. So if they could do that at home with a virtual reality headset beforehand, get a certificate that says, yes, this has been tested 100 times and it's just as effective as a nurse explaining it. How much manpower have you just freed up across all the long-term care facilities, right? So I think there's some great things to be done, and we're seeing devices start to have enough of a user base that you could do some of these things from home. You could also offer them, in the waiting room type of thing, just to free up some staff. So I think there's all that, and then there's, like I said, kind of the soft skills, the mood boost, quality of life type products, which may just serve to get potential patients more comfortable or feeling better about something that is going to happen or has happened on their healthcare journey?
I think you bring up something that's really important. Today, there's a lot of what we call software as a device. Lots of FDA changes, Health Canada changes on adopting apps and things like that is what they call prescriptive digital therapeutics. So I really see the next rendition of this is applying the virtual, sort of the immersive experience of these habit-changing apps and sort of melding the two into these really fabulous new tools. And really, it'd be interesting to see the changes that we're going to be seeing in healthcare around patient outcomes and changes in death rates and disease reception and levels of diabetes and things like that, when we can start to see people positively disrupting it using these kinds of tools. One thing that I think is also interesting here, Mike, is, we talked about learning, we've talked about, both at the provider level and also at the patient level. But I think what's also is part of this is the sort of whole area around social. Part of it is learning for things like conferences, but part of it is also just the way people share their healthcare journey. When we talk about things like Fitbits and different kinds of applications and glucose meters, and people are sharing everything online, everything right now is very analog. But what happens when we start applying virtual reality into those experiences? I'm just curious as to your thoughts as to how far away are we from social in the immersive environment?
Yeah, I don't think we're that far away. I've already seen a fair number of companies using it to prep for social. So like you might practice giving a speech in front of 500 people, or prep for a really contentious meeting that's going to be a debate or something like this, right? So that's already happening. In terms of using it in those actual meetings, I think really what most people use day to day, their number one device is their cell phone. And if you look at the big heads in the industry, the tech leaders at companies like Facebook and Microsoft and even Steam or Valve, they see a trajectory for the industry where virtual reality and augmented reality fuse at some point and replace our current thoughts on what mobile means. So I think once that happens, once everybody no longer has a cell phone and they have either these glasses or whatever it ends up looking like on them, that will be when it becomes the standard, I think. So that may still be 5 to 10 years away. But I think what you'll see gradually in the next 2 to 5 years is like applications like Zoom having options to augment your meeting with these types of things. Kind of similar to, right now you can change your background with a green screen type technology, and maybe they'll have a button where you can do that and see each other in VR sooner rather than later. So I would say we'll see it in our meetings in the next 2 to 5, and I think it will be the new standard for meetings in the next 5 to 10. If the industry goes the way it seems to be going. It's hard. There could be some other new disruptive technology that comes in, but if things continue on their current trajectory, it really does seem like the space is going to be big. There's a lot of stats out there, and I don't want to pick and choose too many stats, but in the next couple of years, virtual reality is approximately going to double, and mobile applications, particularly AR, more like 2 to 4 times in the next.
Yeah, I know. I think it's brilliant. I couldn't agree with you more about the changes in meetings. And I just want to spend just a couple of minutes on AR and how we sort of see there being some potential utilizations in the healthcare space. Right now, as you probably see, a lot of times when people need to learn how to take their medications, especially if they're buying it over the counter, they're actually reading the label on, this very analog 2D thing. Have you or any of your colleagues ever considered this idea of augmented reality, where you put your phone on the packaging of a drug or a tool or some sort of an implement that you're using for a glucose meter, or some sort of new device that you're going to be attaching to and sending information to your nurse, as an example? So you put your phone on it, and then it comes to life and it plays a video and explains how to do things for you. How close are we to that type of reality?
You can do that with today's technology. The question would be, is it worth is adding enough information to be worth it? So I think those types of applications, they'll fit really well once the user base for the hardware is there. So I think really the only thing preventing that from occurring today is where the tech adoption curve is, I think. So I do think those kinds of things will become commonplace. Yeah, I mean, really, in terms of image recognition, target recognition, like looking at a bottle of medication and knowing what it is and ascribing certain information to it based on what it's recognized as, that technology is quite good today, and it's the artificial intelligence or machine learning algorithms that drive that are evolving really fast. As fast as VR is evolving, machine learning type algorithms are evolving faster. So it's common to hear examples from virtual reality developers, something like this. I heard one the other day. So I don't have one, but some of us have like a mannequin head to keep your headset on. So the other day, one of the developers I know said that his augmented reality headset was recognizing that as something that it wasn't. It thought it was an actual person, even though it was just a blank mannequin. And 6 months later, the problem was gone. So someone at Microsoft changed their machine learning target recognition to recognize that mannequins aren't people. So that kind of recognition of images targets is evolving very fast. So I think it's really just the applications we choose to view these things on. Right now it's cell phones. And in a couple of years, 5 years, who knows what it'll be, right?
I think it's so as we start to think about some of the fears that people have, we hear a lot about this, especially as we talk about the melding of, artificial general intelligence with, immersive experience, and what is this rare, raging new world going to look like? We also actually talked today about everybody creating this digital avatar of themselves, and it exists in this echelon of digital anyway. So as we start to get into this wonky, weird world, is there a school of, conservatives or, people who are just plain just scared of what this could look like, especially potentially for people who may suffer from delusion, who might be schizophrenic, people who may have other mental health disorders, who may want to escape in this world of virtual reality, especially when you can go in there and there's your digital avatar and there's all kinds of other things. Is that a valid fear that people need, do we need to excavate that? Can you easily extract yourself? Are some people just going to choose to live, work, and maybe disappear into the virtual world?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really great question. I think there's a few aspects to this. One is privacy. I think if you can, if you can protect people's privacy, that shouldn't be a barrier. And I think there's some great new changes in privacy law to protect consumers. So that being said, I think people do get sucked in, and there could be a danger there. Virtual reality is a fantastic technology, and it's great for 99% of the population. But there are some people who it's not good for. Everybody has a different tolerance to the level of comfort in virtual reality. It's not uncommon still to come across users who feel physically ill in virtual reality, and it's because of the disconnect between what you're seeing and what your body's internal sensors are telling you. And basically what it is everybody's just at a different spot on the spectrum. So where somebody might feel ill at 72 frames per second, someone else may not feel ill until 150 frames per second. So if you're that first person in the 70 frames per second, you might feel queasy with current generation headsets because they're in the 70 to 90 frames per second range. But the 90% of people feel comfortable above 72 frames per second. So not everybody is going to feel comfortable in the current generation of headsets. Those technical hurdles are being overcome so quickly that I think there will soon be none left. But then there's still a lot of people who would have the personality where they would get sucked in and spend a lot of their time in these things. And I think you have to be careful if you it's really more on the social side or the gaming side where they can become time sucks. And one thing that's really good there, though, it really got me into. I've always been a gamer. I've always been a bit of a nerd. But virtual reality gaming, it's great because it's physical. You're doing stuff, and even when you're doing trainings or more enterprise type applications, it's great to be up and doing stuff. And I find, after an hour in VR, it's like I need to sit down, and take a break. Whereas something like a normal software where you're using it on a desktop computer, you would actually feel lethargic or like you need to get up and go for a run after a couple hours of sitting at a computer. So it's actually the opposite effect there. And it's a little bit self-regulating in terms of the amount of time that you spend in it, because it can be physically exhaustive. So there's a little bit of a built-in safety net there. I do think, there are certain people with maybe certain conditions where maybe virtual reality isn't right for them. But I think the vast majority of people will get a ton out of the tech.
I think it's a very interesting concept about one day some of us will be working in VR, and there will be tools, and you'll go into your work environment, and it's mind-boggling to think what it would look like. I actually recently saw there was a company in Europe that has developed a unit that you lie on, and you put your virtual reality glasses on, and it's an exercise unit where you're kind of floating. And very much to your point, it's amazing what the imagination can do. But having said that, there's still some barriers to entry, because some people have some genuine, novelty fear about the unknown in this.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to ask a couple of questions that have come in, and some people are really asking around what you believe for healthcare training. How much readiness do you think healthcare has for VR and AR for people who are content creators? If they want, you guys are considered content creators, you're doing a lot of customized work. You just mentioned something with a small healthcare organization in Kingston. Mm-hmm. What have you been finding has been the uptake? Do you find that it's accelerated since COVID, or do you still find that there's still a large cohort or gravitas of really conservative, I don't want to go there, or this doesn't apply to me?
I think I've noticed there has been an uptake. I think if there's a windfall from COVID, one of them is that people are more willing to accept technology into their lives. They're a little more likely to download a new app that might help them connect with somebody who normally they would have connected with in the quote unquote real world. So that I have noticed a difference there for sure. So yeah, I think in terms of content development, there's a lot that can be done with out-of-the-box tools, and there are some applications coming out. AWS, Amazon has one, and you can develop applications in virtual reality with no code, so that clinics could try and make their own applications using these things. The only problem with them is that there's a lot that you'll find that can't be done with those code-free tools. So I think unless you want to, and there are companies that offer training on this, but unless you want to learn how to use the Unity development engine and code in C#, there's the non-code development tools are really limited to like if you want to walk through a virtual environment, they're great for that. It's relatively easy to bring in your own clinical setting, whatever it is, and make a simple experience there. But if you want to be able to interact with a piece of equipment and press buttons, or do chest compressions on somebody, or administer a medication, for example, it's a little more challenging. I would say that probably, if someone's relatively technical, they could probably learn to develop their own content in a year or two. And there are a number of companies that only do in-house virtual reality development, but they're typically larger companies, like 3M, for example, is a leader in personal protective equipment, among other things, and they have their own virtual reality training group. So they develop training for their for construction safety products that they make. But a lot of the smaller companies and hospitals and clinics, I think they'll probably rely on either commercially developed products that are available in marketplaces such as the Oculus Store, or custom content from companies like Propel.
Absolutely. I think some really good ideas. I think for people who are especially interested in trying to get onboarded, I think that healthcare right now is highly disruptible right now. There's a lot of opportunity for training, learning, both at the patient level, but also at the healthcare provider level. So fascinating, exciting space to be in for sure. So I guess with all of that said, is with COVID-19, is there anything specifically with your company that you are looking to aspire to do moving forward? Is there anything that particular you're trying to specialize in, that you want to bite into, that you want to create a shingle with, and that, a banner around what Propel VR is doing?
Yeah, so I think we kind of had a vision of two product lines: commercial off-the-shelf products and custom products. And we're starting to realize that our current focus is really on the custom work. And part of that is to do with where we're at today, and part of it is to do with the technology. So as we go, we can kind of build up our library of offerings, where a large organization might come to us and pay for something to be developed that could later be put on something like the Oculus Store and purchased at a lower cost for a number of consumers. So that's kind of how we're going to approach that. So going forward, we have some great traction on the industrial mechanical engineering side, in aerospace and nuclear, and are having some conversations with the Department of Defense, which is great. Those procurements take a long time, so I would say that's a 1 to 2 year objective for us, is to get involved with some of the large training efforts in the military space. In terms of healthcare, we want to continue our exploration of customer discovery, I would say, and we've bumped up our advisory team with a couple healthcare specialists, and as I said, we landed that first client in healthcare, doing some custom work. So I really hope that the ACLS training demonstration that we're working on for them has some marketability to others. We've certainly seen from our research that there's interest in this for emergency services, EMS, as well as for emergency room type settings. And I really think, as we talked about earlier, there's so many applications, it's hard to choose. But that ACLS one gives us some focus for now. And because there's a common training called ACLS Megacode, and there's a whole host of modules and content that we could really bite into there. So it's given us enough to chew on for the next 3 to 6 months, I would say. And we'll continue our discussions with healthcare, just starting to talk to EMS, and see if they're interested in those types of products, and find out what their problems are. So that's kind of our roadmap for the next little while. We do hope to move into our office space. Part of the win with Invest Ottawa included some free office space at their Bayview yard, so that's fantastic for us. We're an early stage startup, so that's a big help. So we're hoping to get in there in the fall. They're currently not open still due to restrictions, but looking forward to moving into that space too. They have a really cool technology lab there where you can do some rapid prototyping and testing. So as a geek, I'm excited to get in there big time.
That's awesome. And, as you're thinking at, these early years, I mean, certainly partnerships and opportunities, and as you're navigating with your healthcare advisors and other people on your board, is, starting to delve into some potentially early discussions with pharmaceutical companies. As you know, many pharmaceutical companies, they have products that are at end of exclusivity. They're looking for potentially new applications to lengthen their patents, to keep things in longer, to potentially go into new markets with something that's competitively differentiating, like being able to teach, for example, a new diabetic on how to actually take their glucose testing, and sort of adding maybe a VR application with a package that they get sent in their patient support program. So these are things that could be competitively differentiating, and you could potentially partner with some pharmaceutical companies. So is that something, again, because we do cater to a large pharmaceutical medical device cohort and ecosystem, is that something that Propel VR is open to discussing, and how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're absolutely open to those kinds of partnerships. It's been brought up to us that we should talk to pharma companies as well as medical device companies about partnerships like this. And yeah, very interested in all of the above. So for anybody who's listening, feel free to reach out to us. Like I mentioned, we have quite a bit of experience in the device world. not medical, but we have a team of advisors now. So we're definitely open to those kinds of partnerships. Another one that's common, partnership in the virtual reality training world is partnerships with learning management software companies. So we've also been doing our research and our homework and looking at potential partners. You know, some learning management software companies are already married up to a virtual reality company because they can see the way that training is going, and they can tell that these types of things are coming. So that's another type of partnership that we're looking at. But yeah, certainly open to any and all discussions around how we can work with somebody as opposed to just working for them.
Beautiful. I love it. Mike, I'm very, very excited about the work that you and your team, your other co-founders around Propel VR. Very excited, and congratulations again to the team for winning with the Ottawa Invest Pitch contest. You guys are doing well. You're going to have lots of great advice moving forward, and hopefully many fantastic opportunities and partnerships moving forward. So very excited. For those people who are interested, we will be sending a link to this video recording, and we'll also be posting Mike's LinkedIn profile and their company website if anybody wants to connect. For those of you who are interested in these exciting new bleeding edge technologies, having conversations that are beyond the pill, looking at some of these big, hairy, audacious, provocative topics, that's exactly what we do at Impetus. And so we like to be able to be the bridge for these courageous conversations, bringing people, collaborators, inspirators, thinkers to start helping to disrupt healthcare. And that's what we do with the Impetus Insight platform. If you'd like to learn more, please check out our website, our LinkedIn, our Twitter, and our YouTube channel as well. Thank you very much, Mike. It was a pleasure, and I appreciate everybody attending today. Hope you have all a wonderful day ahead.
Thanks very much, Natalie. Thanks, everyone.